listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe in the independent corner. I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, your burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. It has been a long weekend. It was Thanksgiving. It was Black Friday. People got stampeded. Not really this year. Then it hit the actual weekend proper. And here we are again. It is Monday, November 29th, nearing the last month of this year. A chaotic year indeed. And it's just past 7 a.m. Eastern this morning. Jamarl, how are you doing?
So far, so good. Can't complain.
Good.
How was your Thanksgiving?
It was low-key.
Yeah. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'll use that word for hanging out with my brother at home. But yeah, it was good, man. How was yours?
Yeah, it was good. We went to Richmond to visit family. You know, my mom and basically family. And so we hung out in Richmond for several days and everything else. It's very weird. My grandmother passed this year, and usually my grandmother is kind of the glue that holds the family together in regards to, you know, if there's an event taking place, if there's a holiday, if there's a birthday, you can always go around my grandmother's house. Everybody goes there. That's the meeting place. And so when she passes, there's that anymore. And everybody has their own families and everything else, and people just kind of scatter. And it's like, all right, where's Thanksgiving dinner going to be held today? Where's Christmas dinner going to be held? And nobody knows, you know, because at that point, all of that stuff was settled over the last 40, 50 years. So it's like a rejiggering of the way people get together. It's very strange. But all things being equal, it was good. I got to visit my mom and everything else. It was a good time. Just weird.
Yeah.
That's all.
Oh, that is weird.
Yeah.
That's sad. That's the kind of thing that, I mean, we were talking about this outside, but
yeah,
the other day, but no, that's a big hurdle for somebody to go through. Literally 50 years, 40, 50 years, like multi-generational kind of thing. But glad to hear that overall it was a good time.
Yeah, totally.
Glad to hear it was good going down there. Your home city, of course. Let's get into headlines. First up, in COVID stats, yesterday in the United States, there were 23,950 new COVID cases reported. There were also 107 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 83,365 cases per day. That's an increase of 3% from the average 2 weeks ago. 59% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 70% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 48,195,000 people across the United States. It has killed 777,417 people here. President Biden will provide an update on his administration's response to the new COVID-19 Omicron variant later today. Rising reports of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 have led Japan and Israel to ban all foreign nationals from entering their countries. White House Coronavirus Task Force leader Dr. Anthony Fauci said that it could take several more weeks to have definitive information about the severity and infectiousness of the new variant. At least 44 countries, including the United States, have imposed travel restrictions from several African nations after the Omicron variant was first identified in South Africa and has spread to a number of other nations, including Germany, Italy, the UK, Belgium, Hong Kong, and Israel. In national news, prosecutors in the case against former President Donald Trump's ex-advisor Steve Bannon have accused him of attempting to try his criminal case through the media instead of in court, saying his tactics could affect witnesses against him. According to a new filing in D.C. District Court, Bannon is trying to convince a judge not to bar him and his lawyers from sharing documents he receives from the Justice Department with the public before his trial. I want to come back to this. The public will get a glimpse into the life of the late Jeffrey Epstein as the sex trafficking trial of his longtime companion Ghislaine Maxwell gets underway. Opening statements are expected to begin Monday after a jury is impaneled. Federal prosecutors allege the British socialite created a network of underage victims for Epstein to sexually exploit, and believe you me, we are going to be talking about this. A jury selection starts today in the trial of former Empire star Jussie Smollett. who was indicted last year on 6 counts of making false reports to authorities. That's how I say his name, right?
Juicy.
Juicy, exactly.
It's Jesse, I think, but everybody calls him Juicy.
Juicy, right?
I keep thinking David Chappelle. Juicy.
Yeah, exactly.
Juicy. Yeah.
This follows, coming back to Dave Chappelle in a minute, actually. This follows the dropping, I'll just restart the headline at this point.
My bad.
That was me. Jury selection starts today in the trial of former Empire star Jussie Smollett, who was indicted last year on 6 counts of making false reports to authorities. This follows the dropping of 16 felony disorderly conduct charges against Smollett last year. Judge James Lynn said during an October hearing that no cameras will be allowed in court. So this one will not be fun, sad to say. Police in Beverly Hills, California have launched an investigation after residents received an anti-Jewish hate speech after residents received anti-Jewish hate speech flyers ahead of the first night of Hanukkah, the department said Sunday. The flyers were likely distributed overnight in what police are calling a quote-unquote hate incident, according to a statement from the Beverly Hills Police Department. Police said they received a call from a resident reporting a flyer in their front yard shortly after 6 a.m. on Sunday. Hanukkah began Sunday evening. And I will now go back to Dave Chappelle for just a moment. I don't even know that I want to include this in headlines in later hours, but it's just interesting to me. I found it in a couple of ways. I was coming in this morning, and on the TVs, on the Chiron, they were talking about how Dave Chappelle went to perform at his high school alma mater, and some students didn't like it, which is on the one hand such crazy small news in this, I would argue, this like all-out media campaign against Chappelle. I don't know, have you seen like the tomato meter scores for Dave Chappelle's shows on like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb or anything? So Rotten Tomatoes has the critic score and then the audience score, right? To show you the official critics, what they think, and then what the audience thinks, what random people think. And the critic score is very low for all of Dave Chappelle's specials, and the audience score is very high.
Yeah.
And then you'll compare that with some more like woke comedians, and it will be the complete opposite, where the critic score will be very high.
We love the wokeness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my point is there's like a kind of defined bubble bias for and against certain things. Anyway, so it's just interesting to me that walking in, I saw the mainstream news covering a story about how his high school alma mater didn't like him. Some people didn't like his show.
Yeah.
Probably because of his edgy humor.
Yeah. David Chappelle is hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're rating a comedian on being funny, which is the job of a comedian, what the audience cares about is the primary part for that. Meaning, a critic looking at that and everybody else says, okay, this is utterly hilarious. And the critic is like, yeah, I'm going to give him low marks because I'm not entirely enthused with the subject matter. Get out of here. Get out of here. Yeah, they're just out of touch.
It's true. It's true. Anyway, moving on. In international news, an episode of The Simpsons that mocks Chinese government censorship appears to have been censored on Disney's newly launched streaming service in Hong Kong. That is season 16, episode 12, titled Gugu Gai Pan. It is absent from the archives of Disney Plus in Hong Kong. And in holiday news, last but not least, today is Chadwick Boseman Day. And that's right. For those remembering the late star, remember Chadwick Boseman?
I do.
The actor, wasn't he
Black
the star of Black Panther?
Yeah.
He was the star of Black Panther. Mm-hmm. And he died tragically at a fairly young age very recently.
Yeah, he had cancer.
Exactly. Remember that one.
He was doing those shows with cancer. That's the other wild part.
He got his own holiday, man.
Yeah.
I mean, good actor, but...
Doesn't get a holiday. Shouldn't get a holiday.
I'm just
There's a lot of actors that died. There's a lot of people that died in general. They don't particularly get holidays.
I think that's the first actor holiday I've seen.
I gotta be honest, and this is nothing negative about Boseman because he's not the one who gave himself a holiday, so there's no hit on him.
Not at all. Not at all.
But it's kind of weird. Like he's an actor. I mean, it's not like he invented some new like cold fusion or something.
It's true, but he kind of represented something. He represented.
What did he represent?
Somebody who represented something. I don't know, like the leader of Wakanda. In the Black Panther, exactly.
But you get my point, right? You think of all the people that have basically died and all the people who have died of cancer. I mean, just an unending list of horrid stuff. And it seems like his claim to fame was he had cancer and he was an actor. And he was able to push past the cancer in order to do all of these different roles and everything else. Yeah. But is that worthy of a day? And if that gets a day, shouldn't other stuff get? I don't know. I'm not trying to be a killjoy on something like this. It's I don't get the significance of him acting that warrants a day. I can see Einstein getting a day. for obvious reasons, right?
I could see Einstein getting a permanent day. I could see Chadwick Boseman maybe getting like a 5-year temporary holiday as like a period of remembrance or something like that. And I'm kind of almost not kidding.
Yeah.
But it's just like he was an actor who came to notoriety, came to popularity for only a couple of movies for such a brief period of time that I don't think he will have cemented himself as a cultural icon.
Yeah.
And icon, and will therefore go down as forgotten, just another name or whatever in a registry somewhere, effectively with this holiday, unless it's temporary. Anyway, it is a little bit weird. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Just talking about stuff, and we're back again. And to give folks a heads up this morning, we're going to be revisiting the topic of the Omicron variant on this show.
Mm-hmm. We have Dr. Gene Ollinger.
Dr. Gene Ollinger, exactly, we're going to be talking to at 8:15. And then this hour, a little bit later this hour, we will be speaking with Mark Sloboda.
Yes, as we the conversation.
As we'd like to speak with both of them. And then joined by Tom Whitmore, I do believe.
Yes, Tom Whitmore.
In the last hour,
Tom
if everything
Whitmore
goes
is the
according to plan.
cat. That was the one who was kind of high up in the echelon of MUFON. The reason we're bringing Whitmore on, I was trying to get either Elizondo or somebody close to Elizondo, but the Pentagon is coming out with a new office. And whatever this new office on UAPs is, people like me were like, whoa,
okay,
why are they undercutting these guys?
So for folks who don't know anything, what are UAPs and what's MUFON?
I'm sorry.
You're good.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds or preempt the show. Yeah. But basically, MUFON is, it's the UFO organization that's studied UFO for the last 30, 40 years. They're a private organization. They've been doing this for decades at this point. Mostly nuts and bolts. Like, they would send people out, they would take records, they would take investigations and everything like that. And so they basically have the storehouse of information of things that have taken place for decades. Tom Whitmore was one of the heads of that organization for a period of time. And he's come on the show, 2 or 3 times at this point? He's a pretty good guest. Now, the Pentagon, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, that's what the Pentagon basically calls it. It's basically UFOs. They're trying to change the name to change some of the, let's say, the conceptual biases associated with the UFO. So they're trying to convert it to UAPs. But basically, Congress has started to assert more oversight on the issue. And this goes from Marco Rubio putting out getting the report, the DNI report. This even goes to Gillibrand. This goes to Gallego. You get people like Lindsey Graham, all of these Congress members, bipartisanship, strangely enough, on this particular issue. And then all of a sudden, the Pentagon is like, wait, you can trust us now. I know that we've been lying for 80 years on this particular topic, but now you can trust us. And so they're basically trying to preempt congressional action on this issue by putting in and saying, we have a group that we're going to start. But the catch is, it doesn't have anywhere near the things that Congress had in regards to transparency, nor does it have anything anywhere near to the point of disclosures. This is, to me, their way of trying to basically preempt Congress action on trying to get more transparency and more clarity on what this is. And so we'll see. We'll talk to Whitmore and see what he says about it. Elizondo has a similar take where he's like, just don't cheer this too hard. I mean, he was very clear about it in his thread, basically saying, look, this is the same office that didn't want to give information on this. And so it's like, if this is the same office that didn't want to give information, what do you think they're going to give you for this when that oversight is no longer there by Congress? So we'll see. We'll have a good conversation with Whitmore about it.
There's this question with Elizondo, too, which I don't want to get too deep into this can of worms, and it's a little bit weird to talk about just in general, publicly or whatever.
Yeah.
Because we've had him on the show.
Yeah.
But Lou Elizondo, there's also the question, and the reason I would bring it up here is I would bring it up with him, kind of jokingly. There's this theory that he's like controlled opposition or something, isn't there?
I've thought that myself.
And it's not just you thinking that, is my point. Is like there's this theory. There's like this idea that some people in the community have.
Yeah.
I guess the more fringe elements of the UFO
It's not
community.
even fringe.
Not even necessarily.
Yeah, it's not even necessarily fringe. I mean, yeah.
But that he's controlled opposition, that he's basically working for the government, it's just a press in the long run, but you're doing it in this sort of controlled way where it's, I don't even know the exact idea there. But.
Yeah. Well, I guess the idea is if you needed to get this information out to the American public somehow, and you want the public to believe what you're selling on this, the public knows that you've basically lied for 80 years. The public knows that the information you've put out once before have been to kind of undermine the issue and everything else. And so you send Lou Elizondo out. And the question becomes, okay, who does Lou Elizondo work for? Nobody knows. Why is Lou doing it? Nobody knows. And so all of that stuff is kind of in the shadows. And so from the UFO community standpoint, they like, these guys have lied to us for 80 years, even putting out bogus information in order to kind of screw this over. Is it possible that Lou is coming out here almost like as a white knight, despite the fact that he may still be working for those same forces in order to get a narrative or to get a point of view out to the public? There's no way to know. All this stuff is so in the dark. And look, this is me saying it as I like Lou. And so, like you said, we've interviewed him on the show. But by the same token, he's still, I don't know who he's working for. I don't know his motivation behind the stuff. I don't know why he's doing what he's. I have no idea. All this stuff is in the dark. And you can take him at his word, but you're still left in the dark on some level. So I don't know. But that's not just fringe. I mean, that's when he first came out, he had a huge amount of opposition where people were kind of going at him about that stuff and where there was some kind of testy exchanges between the audience versus him. It's like, I'm giving you the information. You need to, leave it at that or something like that. It was these just kind of back and forths. No, it's something you had to deal with.
Makes sense. Let's take it out. We're going to be coming back to this topic, by the way, again, at the end of the show. It'll be in the 9 o'clock hour at about 9:15, speaking with Tom Whitmore about the Pentagon and what could be an attempt to sort of co-opt or something this movement for more disclosures on the issue of UAPs by basically creating a controlled department or a series of departments, set of departments in the Pentagon. Anyway, we're going to be coming back to the topic at the end of the show. In a minute, we'll be coming back into Jamarl's soapbox segment, his monologue, with a short back and forth, another one between him and I. And then after that, we'll be speaking with Mark Sloboda about NATO's Foreign Ministry Summit in Latvia and our situation in Ukraine. And I really do believe it's our situation in Ukraine. It's not Russia's situation in Ukraine by any means. But we'll be coming back to that just a little later this hour with Mark Sloboda. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the D.C. area or happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can always catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with the chat, the tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I think for the monologue for today, it's going to be on just tone deafness. Tone deafness. Tone deafness of the Democratic Party as a whole, tone deafness from the standpoint of Biden, and tone deafness from Democratic acolytes, such as, in this case, Hillary Clinton, and also, in this case, propagandist-in-chief Rachel Maddow. Clinton is on Maddow's show. This was towards the end of last week. We didn't get the chance to do it because we were off on the show, so this is the first show we got to do, and so this is the one that I'm going to bring up. In her communication back and forth, it comes across almost as a comedy. You basically have two clowns who are giving this deadpan conversation without a shadow of self-awareness in regards to what they're saying in the context of what's taken place and what has taken place over the last 4 or 5 years. At no point was this question of, hey, what about Sussman? What about Danchenko? These people who are affiliated with you and pushing this kind of Russia-Trump psyop over the last several years being arrested or being indicted. Of course, that's not necessarily going to come up. That cuts too close to home to Rachel Maddow, for one, and it also cuts too close to Clinton. I want you to hear some of these quotes because At the end of it, she's going to make this commentary about Joe Biden. And all of this comes across as radical level of mendacity, for one, and utter tone deafness, for two. Let's play the first clip. Crisis of democracy.
So I spend my time trying to figure out what we can do about it. And I am not ever going to give up because there's just too much at stake. But first and foremost, we have to make sure more people, besides people like you, me, Ann Applebaum, and others who share our concerns, see what we see. Because I think that the role of disinformation, the way that propaganda has been really weaponized, and the increasing ability to manipulate people through algorithms and other forms of artificial intelligence will only make this harder to combat.
Think about that for the moment. She's talking about democracy. She's talking about how difficult it is to deal with all of this misinformation and everything else. And Hillary Clinton was the one back in 2016, as she was running against Donald Trump, that basically weaponized this notion of Trump and Russia and used that as a way to basically try to pull Trump or win the election, for one, or two, undermine a sitting president. If you're looking for a coup attempt, I would point to you that the whole Trump and Russia thing, with the investigations that came after that, if they found anything on Trump, whether it was real or imagined, they would have ripped him out of that seat. Whatever you want to think of Donald Trump, put that to the side for the moment. He was a duly elected president. From the standpoint of what Democrats were trying to accomplish, they were trying to use a foreign country in order to undermine a sitting president and, under the highest aspirations, take that sitting president out of his office with a conspiracy theory, for one, but basically using media as lemmings to kind of be the avatar of that conspiracy theory. Let's play the second one. This goes into the same vein. Let's play the clip.
Now, think about it, because that's truly what is behind Trump and his enablers and those who invaded and attacked our Capitol. They don't like the world we're living in, and they have that in common with, autocratic leaders from Russia to Turkey to Hungary to Brazil and so many other places who are driven by personal power and greed and corruption, but who utilize fears about change to try to get people to hate one another and feel insecure, and therefore be easily manipulated by demagogues and by disinformation.
This comes across as deadpan humor. It's like when the comedian stands there with a complete straight face and says something, and because of the context that they're saying this in, everybody else gets the joke, but the comedian stands there with a complete straight face. That's what this sounds like. Driven by power, driven by this notion of trying to lead and trying to win. They create hostility between the various Americans and everything else. If that wasn't Russiagate, I don't know what is. I mean, think about it for the moment. You had people saying that Russia was responsible for Black Lives Matter because they were, African Americans were upset that they were getting shot by cops. And this was ginned up by Russia. You had them saying the same thing about environmental thing. Anything that would come up that was created some level of consternation in American society wasn't from America in and of itself. It was from some foreign outside body. The person who basically engineered all of this is sitting there right now talking about everybody else and talking about Donald Trump. Whatever you want to say about Donald Trump in regards to that coup attempt, it's fair enough to say that Donald Trump tried a coup attempt, but it's also fair to say Clinton did it first. She did it first. After all, what was Russiagate if it wasn't an attempt to rip out a sitting and duly elected president? And I'm saying this as somebody who can't stand Trump. I find him to be utterly atrocious in regards to his office and president and the number of people who got killed due to policies and everything else. By the same token, he was elected. Hillary Clinton wasn't. And the stuff that they put out for those people who are affiliated with Hillary Clinton at this point are being perp-walked on one side and being indicted on the other. All of those things are directly related to basically this psyop of getting rid of a sitting president. Hillary Clinton could point to Donald Trump and said he tried to commit a coup. Fair enough. I'm pointing to her and saying she tried to do the same thing. Let's play one more clip. And this gets to the whole tone deafness around Joe Biden. A recent article came out basically making the point that says Democrats they're concerned, let's say, put it that way, and that's putting it mildly, about their chances coming forward in the next either midterms, but also in the next presidency. Democrats struggle to energize their base as frustration mounts. Now, what's interesting about this one is Clinton edges into this conversation about Joe Biden. Let's play the clip, because, again, I'm believing this is utterly and entirely tone deaf. I think they're missing the level of concern and frustration that the American public has against this administration and against Democrats proper. Let's play the clip.
You know, democracy is messy. You know, a lot of people got, I think kind of frustrated looking at the messy process of legislation. And they didn't really appreciate that within a year, the Biden administration has passed two major pieces of legislation through both the House and the Senate. They've passed another major piece through the House that will soon be in the Senate. By any measure, those are extraordinary accomplishments, and they really will help many millions of Americans with health care and prescription drug prices, as well as climate change and so much else. But because of the way we are getting our information today, and because of the lack of gatekeepers and people who have a historic perspective, who can help us understand what we are seeing, there is a real vulnerability in the electorate to the kind of demagoguery and disinformation that, unfortunately, the other side is really good at exploiting.
So to paraphrase Hillary Clinton, we need more gatekeepers. We need more gatekeepers. We need more people massaging the data and the information in order to cajole the public into a particular set of beliefs, as opposed to having the public come up with their own belief system. I find that to be an astonishing statement. It's not two bills. One COVID bill was the bill that Donald Trump himself was trying to pass, meaning if you're going to say these are two major accomplishments, if the previous president was going to pass it, how are you going to put that as a quote-unquote major accomplishment? And again, this is a major accomplishment in the context of the world burning down, with 700,000 people basically dropping dead. And they're pulling more and more out of the plan. You start off with $3.5 trillion, and then that gets knocked down, and it's probably going to get knocked down even further than that. Basically, Biden gets passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill. Good. The country clearly needed it. But that's basically it. Donald Trump was trying to get past the COVID bill himself, so I'm not going to give Biden this kind of extra credit for that. So basically, with an administration with all of these people basically dying over the course of this year or year and a half, the best that Biden could do is one big policy bill. That's it. And she doesn't understand why the public is perturbed or bothered by that. She doesn't understand why they're losing double-digit losses in various constituencies of Hispanics, African Americans, etc. She doesn't get it. But I would say this, the Democrats will get it when they lose the midterms monstrously, and when Biden gets unseated as president in the next election. That's assuming he even makes it to the next presidency. When Shane gets back, we're going to have a conversation about it. But, you know, in the situation to which we find ourselves, Hillary Clinton is basically trying to give Biden a buck up, or he's really doing great despite the way you guys are thinking that he's doing poorly. I don't think people are in the wrong on this. The Democratic Party spent the last 5 or 6 months basically arguing and negotiating with themselves. And they basically said, okay, we're going to pass this $3.5 trillion. And they spent the last 4 months pulling one issue out of the bill. Many of those things were dramatically popular. And that doesn't even get to the items that Biden didn't even try to get accomplished or basically washed away. There were campaign pledges. The $15 an hour minimum wage. He said everything below that is a starvation wage. Didn't stop him from killing that or walking past it immediately when it happened. Did they not know the filibuster was going to be an issue? And how can you say we're going to do X and Y without dealing with the filibuster and your plans to do X and Y? I'm making the point that there's been one failure after the next of this particular administration. And the level of tone deafness and trying to get across to the public that, no. I know you guys think that Biden is rough. I mean, the 30-something% approval rating and all. However, you guys just got it wrong. He's phenomenal. I don't think it's the people that got it wrong. I don't think it's the people that got it wrong at all. I think the people are pretty correct in their assessment of this particular administration and this particular party, pulling out one item after the next from a particular bill, many of which are things that the public really wanted. Medicare for all, for example, or for that matter, expanding Medicare to include drug prices and those type of things, and to expand the number of people that are eligible for it, not to mention dental and vision. Think about the number of people that affects. You're talking about 40-something million people, and you're talking about doing this at a time during a pandemic. It seems to go hand in glove. This is the most popular policy that they have associated with Biden's plan, and it is also one of the things that Biden took out. This is after he went spending all of this time talking about a public option and everything else. Clinton and the Democratic Party can try to gaslight all they want. That tone deafness is not necessarily going to convince the public that Biden is something that he's not. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with the one and only Mark Sloboda. Back shortly.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Over the time we've been on the holiday, there's been a right much stuff that's taken place in regards to the United States, Russia, Ukraine, etc. And I would make the point that this is more so provocative action by the United States, or for that matter, Ukraine. But the question that has been pushed to Biden is, how far is Biden going to go to, quote unquote, defend Ukraine? And this goes everything from Biden sending weapons, or considering sending weapons, and even sending military personnel, or let's say military advisors, to that particular conflict. It's very wild. It's very weird. It's been getting a huge amount of press lately, including this recent story that just came out saying that there's supposed to be a coup attempt, or that Biden is concerned about an alleged coup attempt supposedly taking place in Ukraine. To have a conversation about this and other items taking place on the geopolitical stage, we're joined with the one and only Mark Sloboda. Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. Mark, thank you for joining me, man. How are you doing today?
Jamarl, Shane, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you. So give us some context on this. I mean, when I saw the thing that Biden was considering sending weapons to the Ukraine and considering sending military advisors, you know, it perked my interest, to put it mildly. If you remember when Obama was in office, Obama wouldn't send weaponry into the Ukraine because under Obama's idea, I don't necessarily want U.S. weapons killing Russians. That creates a difficult geopolitical issue for the United States. When Donald Trump comes in, of course, everybody forgets that part, and everybody is attacking Donald Trump for not sending offensive weapons to Ukraine. Now it seems like the conversation is being had now, and this conversation is taking place after it was admitted that those weapons were being used either against Russia or against troops that Russia are supporting. What is going on in this issue, and how serious should we take this? I mean, is this hitting these kind of red line marks at this point?
Yeah, okay, so, you know, the military arming of Ukraine began, of actual U.S. weapons, began under Trump. You know, the supposedly pro-Russia president whose administration turned out to be quite the opposite. It has to be said that these weapons, and all weapons supplied to Kiev, because weapons have been supplied by Europe to Kiev, particularly old Soviet stock weapons that they were much more familiar with, able to use as part of their military procurement cycles. That has been going on for years now. That has been going on since 2014. But this arming of Kiev, the Kiev regime, by U.S. weapons, okay, the intent is actually, of course, not to kill Russians. These weapons are not being used to kill Russians. Kiev has not been killing Russians, unless we're talking ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and it's far from just only ethnic Russians. It's East Ukrainians, whether those are ethnic Russian, ethnic Ukrainian, or whatever, because that is who the Kiev regime has been killing for the last 7 years. Now the narrative is, oh, they're fighting Russia, or then they sometimes might make Russia-backed separatists or something like there. Yeah, well, I mean that's like the equivalent of saying the U.S.-backed putsch regime is fighting Russia-backed separatists. Yeah, it's Ukrainians killing Ukrainians. It's the Ukrainians that seized power violently, unconstitutionally, with U.S. backing and orchestration in 2014, still trying to kill the Ukrainians in East Ukraine into subjugation, into accepting that seizure of power. It's still going on, and the 14,000 plus dead as a result of this conflict, right? And it's not Ukrainians killing Russian invaders, quote unquote, right? It's Ukrainians killing Ukrainians, and that's what continues today. And when Trump and when President Biden are arming the regime in Kiev, they are assisting it to murder its own people, quote unquote, right? People that it believes that it has a right to rule over anyway. And we're looking at what is starting to be the ratcheting, continuing up of arms. It's something that is now occurring about every 6 months or so, even less, as the political hysteria heats up in Washington. There is this, we have to do something, and the sanctions have been done and done and done again, and are still done, and they never have any effect on Russian foreign policy or its security interests. But they keep starting to pile the weapons on now, and they have supplied Javelin missiles. They're supplying more of them now, anti-tank missiles. But for the first time, there's word that they have been moved out of boxes in West Ukraine and are now actually being deployed in East Ukraine along the contact line. Now the U.S. is talking about spending hundreds of millions of dollars more of U.S. military equipment, including mortars, and the shelling of Donbass by Ukraine is something that, despite the frozen conflict, is going on a daily basis. All right, every day there are injuries or fatalities of civilian areas of Donbass as a result of this shelling. And in mortars, absolutely, that will be killing East Ukrainians. They're ironically also talking about selling Ukraine Russian-made helicopters. Because the U.S. had purchased a number of Russian-made helicopters for the Mi-17 helicopters for the use by Afghan army forces in Afghanistan, because they perform much better in desert conditions, and the Afghans were familiar with them, going back, decades to the Soviet period for the Soviet intervention in the country in support of the beleaguered socialist government there. And now the U.S. doesn't need those helicopters in Afghanistan because its proxy forces fell apart, literally overnight. So now they want to give these helicopters to Ukraine. And they're also talking, other missile systems and other arms being sent. And as the Russian presidential press spokesman Dmitry Peskov has stated, as for this quote unquote U.S. military advisors, they've been there for a long time. The only thing is the number of them is now increasing. And the British press has been reporting that 600 British Special Forces troops are on standby. This was the word out of the British press last week, to be sent to Ukraine as well. This is, I mean, if Russia was not planning, and I have seen no plans, certainly nothing being implemented for an intervention in East Ukraine. But if they hadn't been considering it, the U.S. sending more weaponry to Kiev, putting troops on the NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine in lieu of pushing Kiev to fulfill the Minsk Accords and seeking political reconciliation with East Ukraine, which has still gone absolutely nowhere, then Russia is certainly going to see that as a red line being crossed. And they may spur Russia to consider a military intervention in East Ukraine.
Well, okay, military intervention, I want to come back to that, but also this the talk of a coup, Biden talking about a coup possibly in Ukraine. What's that about, Mark?
This is coming from Zelensky. This is this comedian turned president. And Zelensky took office with a 75% approval rating. And as of last week, his approval rating in Ukraine is 24%. He is extremely unpopular in the country and is doing whatever he can to try to bolster that. When the nominally pro-Russia opposition bloc, the reformation of East Ukrainian parties into the new political structure, the opposition bloc, last year for the first time began to show that it might be the most popular party in the country. Zelensky launched a series of domestic political attacks. There's been politically motivated charges against the leader of the opposition in Ukrainian politics, controlled the media for so long. But, of course, all the evidence is, and I mean, this is openly discussed, and even in the Ukrainian press, that, of course, he doesn't go after his own oligarch backers or oligarchs that tend to side with him on political economic issues. But he's simply going after the other oligarchs who don't step in line with him. And of course, that is just another form of corruption. And the latest target is an oligarch that has stepped out of line with Kiev after years of being in line, Akhmatov, one of the largest oligarchs in Ukraine, a mining industry billionaire. And this is what this talk of a coup is. It is an attempt to begin going after this person and to attempt to try to raise Zelensky's flagging approval ratings and domestic support within the country, because it's really in a bad situation because of the economic crisis, an ongoing political crisis in the country, not just between Zelensky and opposition political parties, but also between him and the judiciary of the country, where he's been attacking the highest court, the equivalent of the Supreme Court in Ukraine, for basically since he took office. Huge economic problems, energy crisis, pandemic crisis, and there's nothing like declaring that his regime is under threat again to try to bolster that, rally around the flag.
Both from a coup, a potential coup, and from Russia, crucially.
Yeah, I mean, and of course they're always tied together. You know, if there's anything bad going on anywhere in the world, much less Ukraine, Russia is responsible for it.
So how much concern should we have for this? I mean, because it does seem to be a ratcheting up. If Britain is talking about sending troops, if Biden is thinking about sending advisors, now there's a coup, supposedly, or the whispers of a coup or rumors of a coup that comes out, even if it is just for political, let's say, gaslighting of sorts in order to kind of gin up his popularity or to get support outside of the country. this is somewhat disconcerting, correct? Or or is this just the optics of it all without any kind of without a real oomph behind it? I hope that makes sense. Like, how concerned should we be about the information coming out of Ukraine?
Well, yeah, I'm not expecting a Russian invasion anytime in the near future, because all of this talk has been about, Russia's building up forces on the border. And originally, the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian State Border Service, and even Zelensky himself were saying, Russian military buildup on our border? What are you talking about? There's nothing there. They haven't building up.
Yeah.
They have the same number of troops that they have had since we seized power here on the border.
That was how we got introduced to the story weeks ago, before the new sort of media frenzy or whatever on it. But back, Mark.
Yeah, and then the U.S. government, the Biden administration is like, no, don't you see that Russian invasion force massing there? Those 90,000 troops that have been there for the last 6 years, right? And wink, wink, nod, nod. And then Zelensky's like, was I saying Western disinformation about a buildup? I mean Russian disinformation about Western news that there is a buildup. Yes, that's what I was saying. There's absolutely no indication of a Russian military buildup. 90,000 troops is a border defense and deterrence force. Ukraine is a country of some 40 million people with a 250,000 strong military that the Western governments have been funding and training and arming for years now. A Russian military intervention force in Ukraine is going to be 300,000 to 500,000 Russian troops on the border, not less troops than we saw during the last fake invasion scare 6 months ago. So I would be happy personally to see an intervention force, because I think it's needed, but it's not in the cards yet. But what is possible and what would spur an intervention is that Zelensky, he sees flagging political, economic support, particularly from Europe, but also from the United States. Biden sending out signals that are being read in the blob is that he would rather focus on China than Russia, so on. All of this makes Zelensky very uncomfortable. There was the possibility of Nord Stream 2 going online soon. That has been kiboshed as well, seemingly by the new incoming German government. But there is nothing like raising support, raising more money, more weapons, more opportunities for Kiev than crying wolf again, and provoking a resumption of conflict in East Ukraine that would cause Russia to do something, even if it's just more deterrent saber rattling.
When you said, Mark, I want to go back to the word that you used there crucially, and I get your point with Ukraine as an incentive for them to do that kind of thing to get the West to back them more. And by the West, of course, I mean the EU,
provocation.
The U.S.
Yeah.
Provocation, yeah. When you said intervention, a Russian intervention, basically, you're talking about in Luhansk and Donetsk, in the two people's republics that have broken away and that the West views as Russian annexed or whatever, in addition to the Crimean territories, but basically these breakaway territories that are in a state of civil war. The intervention would be sending some troops into those territories. Are you talking about a larger incursion into, of a Ukrainian? You're talking about the former, of course, right, Mark?
That's a question.
That is a question.
That is a question in Russia right now. I mean, obviously, because you do not see 300 to 500,000 Russian troops building up or any real buildup. But right now, the political discourse in Russia is that, the West has made it impossible for a peaceful reconciliation of the civil conflict turned proxy conflict in Ukraine. France and Germany have openly denied Russia to pressure Kiev to do the most basic step one of the Minsk II Accords, which is to sit down across the table from the leadership in East Ukraine, in Donbass, and to begin to talk to each other, which they have never yet done. And France and Germany in a meeting with the Russian government representatives said, no, we won't. We have no intention. We will not force them. We will not pressure them to do that. We will not even ask them to do that. And Russia's like, well, then, the Minsk II is, as Kiev has long said, dead.
Yeah.
And if that's enshrined in a UN Security Council resolution, which is under, international terms, as close as it comes to being, sacred. And then Russia says, well, then there is no hope of a diplomatic option. And you keep arming the regime in Kiev, and we'll keep, on the side, escalation, dominance, giving then equal weapons, ability to defend themselves to the people of Donbass and East Ukraine. So where does that end? Nowhere. And then Russia has to seriously consider a military resolution, because there's no point in talking to Kiev, as the Kremlin has finally come to the conclusion. We have to talk to the U.S.
There's necessarily the conversation about preemptively cutting off that sort of arms racy escalatory mentality just from the get-go by initiating that kind of... I understand the mindset, and of course that's a whole can of worms, which is why that's a question and a controversial conversation, I'm sure, to be having. But here's another side of it. Does Russia even want this territory? I remember talking with you multiple times in the past about what a hornet's nest getting that territory would be. All sorts of separatist sentiments and nationalist sentiments in the region there, and of course the whole Ukrainian-Russian question I don't even fully understand, but know that it's a much older one. Regardless, not economically vital territory. It's not like these are Ukraine is particularly industrially developed. Mark.
Yeah, it would be a huge economic burden to raise. It's a huge economic burden just to provide supplies to Donbass, much less to the rest of Ukraine. And as you rightly point out, while there is, much more pro-Russia or not anti-Russia sentiment in East Ukraine and West Ukraine, which was not part of, the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union until right up until World War II. These provinces that were part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Austro-Hungary, known as Galicia in West Ukraine, they are fervently, virulently, rabidly anti-Russian and pro-Banderite fascist, organization of Ukrainian nationalists and Ukrainian insurgent army, Nazi collaborators there. So yeah, it would be it would be a guerrilla war if they were to. But here's the increasing political rhetoric saying we have to defend Ukraine. Ukraine is ours. We have to defend it, which is one step removed. Yeah, I mean,